Most people believe they are good listeners. They nod, they stay quiet, they wait for their turn to speak. But Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists in human history, would say this gently and clearly. Most people are not listening at all. They are preparing responses, evaluating meaning, defending their position, or silently rehearsing what they will say next. And in doing so, they miss the one question every human being is silently asking beneath their words. Do you truly understand me? Deep connection does not come from clever advice, emotional intensity, or the right words at the right time. It comes from being received without distortion. Carl Rogers believed that healing does not occur because someone is fixed. It occurs because someone is deeply heard. Not interrupted, not corrected, not analyzed too quickly, but heard in a way that allows their inner world to unfold safely, without pressure or judgment. If you want to be a better listener, not superficially, but in a way that transforms relationships, you must understand one radical idea at the center of Carl Rogers' work. Listening is not something you do to someone. Listening is something you offer them. And like any meaningful offering, it requires presence, humility, and restraint. Most people listen in order to respond. Carl Rogers listened in order to understand. This single shift changes everything. Rogers observed that when people feel deeply understood, something remarkable happens. Their defensiveness softens. Their scattered thoughts begin to organize themselves. Their emotional intensity naturally regulates, not because someone told them what to feel, but because they finally felt safe enough to feel it. This is why deep listening is not passive. It is an active psychological stance, and it begins with what Carl Rogers called unconditional positive regard. This does not mean approval. It does not mean agreement, and it does not mean tolerance in a shallow sense. It means I am willing to stay present with your inner experience, even when it makes me uncomfortable. Most people withdraw the moment discomfort arises. They change the subject, they minimize the emotion, they joke, they rush to solutions. But a Rogers-informed listener does the opposite. They remain emotionally present. They create space instead of filling it. They allow the experience to exist without trying to control it. To be a better listener, you must understand that people do not primarily need answers. They need clarity. And clarity emerges when thoughts and emotions are reflected back accurately. This brings us to one of Carl Rogers' most misunderstood tools, reflection. Reflection is not repetition. It is not parroting words. And it is not mechanical validation. True reflection is the art of mirroring meaning. When someone speaks, they are often unclear themselves. Their emotions are layered, contradictory, unfinished. A skilled listener listens beneath the words, then gently offers the meaning back. For example, so what I'm hearing is that part of you feels overwhelmed, and another part feels guilty for feeling that way. This does something profound. It organizes inner chaos without controlling it. Rogers noticed that when people hear their inner world reflected accurately, they often respond with something like, yes, that's it. That's exactly it. That moment is not agreement. It is recognition. And recognition is the foundation of deep connection. Most conversations fail not because people disagree, but because they never feel recognized in the first place. To become a better listener, you must release the urge to be impressive. Rogers warned that the need to sound intelligent often blocks understanding. Advice interrupts emotional process. Interpretation can feel invasive. Premature reassurance can feel dismissive. When someone says, I feel like I'm failing, and you respond with, no, you're doing great, you may think you are helping. But psychologically, you have just told them their inner experience is incorrect. A Rogers-style listener responds differently. It sounds like no matter how much you do, it never feels like enough. Notice the difference. One response closes the experience, the other opens it. This is why deep listening requires emotional courage. You must be willing to sit with pain without fixing it, with confusion without clarifying it too quickly, with silence without filling it. Silence in Carl Rogers' work is not emptiness, it is integration. Many breakthroughs happen after the listener stops talking. Rogers also emphasized congruence, the listener's authenticity. This means you are not hiding behind technique. You are real, present, grounded. But your authenticity never overshadows the speaker's experience. A better listener does not say, "I know exactly how you feel," because you don't. And claiming that often shuts exploration down. Instead, they say, "Help me understand what this feels like for you." That sentence alone can deepen a relationship more than years of advice. Carl Rogers believed that when the right psychological conditions are present, people naturally move toward growth. Listening is not about direction, it is about permission. Permission to feel, permission to question, permission to change. This is why deep listening feels rare. It requires the listener to surrender control. Control is often what people mistake for care. If you want to be a better listener, ask yourself this honestly. Am I trying to guide this person, or am I trying to understand them? Because those two intentions create very different conversations. When people feel unheard, they do not usually become louder. They become smaller. Their sentences shorten, their emotional range narrows, their body tightens. Carl Rogers noticed this repeatedly in his clinical work. The moment a person senses that their inner experience is being evaluated, corrected, or rushed, the nervous system shifts into protection. Connection does not break loudly, it collapses quietly. This is why listening is not only a communication skill, it is a biological signal of safety. When someone feels truly listened to, their body receives a nonverbal message: you are safe here. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, emotional intensity becomes tolerable. The mind no longer has to defend itself. This is not metaphor. This is neurophysiology. Rogers understood this long before modern neuroscience confirmed it. He observed that empathy regulates distress more effectively than logic. When a listener accurately reflects emotional meaning, the speaker's nervous system begins to settle on its own. No advice is required, no solutions are necessary. Safety itself becomes therapeutic. Most people unknowingly disrupt this process. They interrupt emotional flow with questions that redirect attention outward instead of inward. Why do you think that? Have you tried looking at it differently? What you should do is, each of these responses may sound helpful, but psychologically, they pull the speaker out of their internal experience. The moment that happens, the body closes again. A Rogers-informed listener stays with the emotional thread. They follow the speaker's pace instead of imposing their own. They do not chase clarity prematurely. They trust that understanding unfolds naturally when space is protected. This patience is not passive, it is intentional restraint. One of the most common listening mistakes is trying to reduce emotional discomfort too quickly. When someone expresses sadness, fear, anger, or shame, the listener often rushes to neutralize it. It's not that bad. Everything happens for a reason. At least you learned something. These statements may be well-intentioned, but they subtly communicate that the emotion itself is a problem. Carl Rogers would never treat an emotion as something to be removed. He understood emotions as signals, not obstacles. A better listener allows emotion to exist without trying to improve it. They recognize that emotions resolve when they are fully experienced and understood, not when they are minimized. This is especially important in conflict. During disagreement, most people listen defensively. They listen for errors, they listen for weakness, they listen for opportunities to correct. But deep listening does not disappear during conflict. It becomes even more essential. Rogers demonstrated that when one person feels fully understood, even in disagreement, hostility decreases. You do not have to agree with someone to understand them. Understanding does not mean surrender, it means recognition, and recognition lowers threat. A powerful Rogers-based practice in conflict is reflecting the other person's position before expressing your own. This does not weaken your stance, it strengthens communication. When someone hears their perspective reflected accurately, they are more willing to hear yours. Without that foundation, conversation turns into parallel monologues. Deep listening also requires awareness of your own internal reactions. Rogers emphasized that listeners must notice when their own emotions arise: irritation, anxiety, defensiveness, impatience. These reactions are not failures, they are signals, but they must be regulated internally rather than acted out verbally. A better listener does not suppress their reactions, nor do they project them. They acknowledge them silently and return attention to the speaker. This self-regulation is what allows listening to remain open rather than reactive. Without it, listening becomes selective and distorted. Another critical aspect of Rogers' listening philosophy is respecting the speaker's autonomy. Many listeners unconsciously try to steer the conversation toward what they believe is healthy, correct, or productive. Rogers resisted this impulse. He trusted the individual's innate capacity for growth. When you listen without directing, the speaker begins to hear themselves more clearly. Their own insights emerge organically. This is why advice often feels unnecessary when someone has been deeply heard. The clarity they were seeking arises from within. Rogers also warned against performative empathy. Saying the right words without genuine presence is ineffective. People can feel when empathy is mechanical. True listening is not about sounding therapeutic. It is about being emotionally available. This means sometimes saying very little. Sometimes the most powerful response is a brief reflection followed by silence. Silence allows meaning to settle. It gives the nervous system time to integrate. It invites the speaker to continue, not because they are pressured, but because they feel supported. Deep listening also changes how people relate to themselves. When someone experiences consistent empathic listening, they begin to internalize that voice. They become more compassionate toward their own emotions. Self-criticism softens. Inner dialogue becomes more humane. This is one of Carl Rogers' most enduring contributions. The idea that external empathy becomes internal self-understanding. This is why listening well is not just about improving relationships with others. It shapes the emotional climate people carry within themselves. Being listened to teaches people how to listen to their own experience without judgment or fear. If you want to practice this in everyday life, start small. Do not aim to listen perfectly. Aim to listen sincerely. Slow down your responses. Reflect meaning rather than content. Let go of the need to fix. Notice when you feel the urge to redirect, and choose presence instead. Remember, the goal of listening is not to manage emotions. It is to understand them, not to change the person, but to meet them where they are. One of the quiet fears that prevents people from listening deeply is the belief that listening creates responsibility. Many people worry, if I listen fully, I'll have to fix this. Carl Rogers addressed this concern directly. He believed that understanding does not obligate control. Listening does not make you responsible for solving someone's life. It simply makes you present for their experience. This distinction matters. When listeners confuse empathy with responsibility, they either avoid listening or rush into advice. Both reactions interrupt connection. Rogers' approach allows you to remain engaged without becoming overburdened. You can care deeply without taking ownership of outcomes that do not belong to you. Another fear is saying the wrong thing, but Rogers demonstrated that listening is far more about what you do not say than what you say. Perfect wording is unnecessary. Emotional accuracy is what matters. A simple reflection that captures the essence of what someone feels is far more powerful than eloquent commentary. When you listen well, the speaker is not evaluating your performance. They are tracking whether they feel understood. If your reflection is slightly off, they will correct it. And that correction deepens clarity rather than breaking connection. Listening is not fragile. It is collaborative. Carl Rogers also emphasized that deep listening requires slowing the pace of conversation. Modern communication rewards speed, efficiency, and conclusions. Listening requires the opposite. It values pauses. It allows incomplete thoughts. It welcomes uncertainty. When the pace slows, emotional truth has room to surface. This is especially important in relationships where patterns have already formed. Couples, families, and long-term friends often stop listening because they believe they already know what the other person will say. Rogers would caution against this assumption. The moment you think you already understand, you stop being curious. And curiosity is the lifeblood of listening. A better listener approaches each conversation as new. Even familiar stories contain evolving emotional layers. When you listen without preconception, you allow the person to be who they are now, not who they were the last time you heard them speak. Rogers also made it clear that listening is shaped by attitude more than technique. You can use every reflective phrase correctly and still fail to connect if your underlying stance is judgmental, rushed, or self-focused. The listener's internal posture matters. Are you genuinely open to the other person's reality, or are you waiting for your turn? Deep listening requires a willingness to be affected, not controlled, not overwhelmed, but touched. When you listen without emotional distance, the other person senses it. This is why presence cannot be faked. It is felt before it is heard. At the same time, Rogers emphasized boundaries. Listening deeply does not mean absorbing everything emotionally. It means staying grounded while remaining open. If you feel yourself becoming flooded, it is appropriate to pause. You can say, I want to understand this, and I notice I need a moment to stay present. This honesty preserves connection rather than damaging it. One of the most transformative effects of deep listening is how it alters power dynamics. When someone feels truly heard, they no longer need to fight for validation. They stop exaggerating, they stop repeating themselves, their tone softens, their posture relaxes, listening reduces struggle. This is why Rogers' approach is so effective in leadership, parenting, and therapy. People cooperate more readily when they feel understood. Compliance is unnecessary when connection is present. Listening creates alignment without force. Deep listening also changes how you respond to strong emotions like anger. Most people react to anger defensively. They hear threat rather than meaning. Rogers taught that anger is often a surface emotion protecting vulnerability beneath. A better listener listens for what the anger is guarding. Instead of responding to volume or intensity, they reflect underlying meaning. It sounds like you felt dismissed, and that really hurt. When anger feels understood, it often de-escalates naturally. No power struggle is required. Rogers also believed that listening must be non-possessive. You do not claim someone's vulnerability because they shared it with you. You do not use it later. You do not store it as leverage. Deep listening is rooted in respect. Without this ethical foundation, listening becomes manipulation. This respect builds trust over time. When people learn that they can speak with you without being analyzed, corrected, or exposed, they open more fully. Trust is not built through intensity. It is built through consistency. Practicing this kind of listening takes patience. You will make mistakes. You will interrupt. You will feel uncomfortable. Rogers did not expect perfection. He believed in genuine effort. Each attempt at listening refines your capacity to stay present. As you practice, notice how conversations begin to change. People speak more slowly. They go deeper. They reveal complexity instead of rehearsed narratives. You may notice fewer dramatic conflicts, not because problems disappear, but because they are addressed earlier and more honestly. To bring Carl Rogers' philosophy of listening into daily life, it helps to think in terms of conditions rather than techniques. Techniques can be memorized. Conditions must be embodied. Rogers believed that when certain internal conditions are present in the listener, deep connection emerges naturally, without effort or performance. The first condition is presence. Presence means your attention is not divided. You are not half listening while planning what to say next or scanning for an outcome. Your body is oriented. Your voice is steady. Your mind is here. People sense presence immediately. It communicates respect before a single word is spoken. The second condition is emotional openness. This means you allow the other person's experience to exist without ranking it. You do not decide whether it is justified, logical, or productive. You receive it as it is. Emotional openness does not require agreement, it requires suspension of judgment. When judgment pauses, understanding begins. The third condition is empathic accuracy. This is the ability to reflect meaning rather than content. Instead of repeating facts, you reflect feelings and themes. You listen for what matters most beneath the story. When empathic accuracy is present, the speaker feels met rather than mirrored. A simple way to practice this is to listen for emotional verbs rather than events, not what happened, but how it landed, not the sequence, but the impact. When you reflect impact, people feel understood at a deeper level than they often expect. The fourth condition is restraint. Restraint is the willingness to not intervene too quickly, to allow silence, to tolerate ambiguity, to resist the impulse to rescue. Restraint communicates trust in the speaker's capacity to process their own experience. Without restraint, listening becomes control. Carl Rogers trusted that people move toward growth when they feel psychologically safe. Safety is not created by solutions. It is created by being seen without pressure to change. When people feel safe, insight follows. There are also clear signs that deep listening is working. The speaker begins to slow down. Their voice softens. They use more precise language. They correct themselves thoughtfully rather than defensively. They may pause and say something like, "I've never said it that way before." These moments signal integration. Another sign is emotional deepening. Instead of circling the same story, the speaker reaches a more vulnerable layer. This is not because you asked the right question. It is because the environment allowed it. It is important to understand that deep listening does not mean never speaking. It means speaking intentionally. When you do speak, your words serve understanding rather than direction. Short reflections are often more effective than long explanations. Fewer words, more accuracy. For example, instead of offering interpretation, you might say, "It sounds like this has been weighing on you longer than you realized." That single sentence can open space without steering the outcome. Listening also requires adaptability. Not every moment calls for deep exploration. Sometimes people want practical input. Rogers would not deny this. The difference is that practical support is most effective after understanding has been established. When people feel heard, they are more receptive to guidance. A useful internal checkpoint is this. Ask yourself whether the person feels calmer, clearer, or more grounded after speaking. If not, more listening may be needed. Understanding precedes action. Deep listening also transforms how you experience conversations. You may notice that you feel less pressure to perform, less urgency to be right, more curiosity. This is because listening shifts the focus from managing interaction to witnessing experience. Over time, this approach changes relationship dynamics. People may begin to seek you out for conversation, not because you give the best advice, but because they feel safe speaking with you. Safety is rare, and it is deeply valued. Carl Rogers believed that this form of listening was not only therapeutic, but ethical. To listen deeply is to honor another person's autonomy and dignity. It is a way of saying, your inner world matters. In a culture that rushes, corrects, and competes, this is quietly radical. Listening also deepens self-awareness. As you practice staying present with others, you become more aware of your own internal responses. You learn where you tense, where you rush, where you withdraw. This awareness is not self-criticism, it is information. As your listening deepens, so does your capacity for empathy toward yourself. You become more patient with your own emotions, less reactive to discomfort, more accepting of complexity. Rogers believed that the relationship we offer others eventually becomes the relationship we offer ourselves. At the core of Carl Rogers' work is a simple but demanding truth. People do not change because they are convinced. They change because they are understood. Deep listening is not a strategy to influence others. It is a way of meeting them where they are, without agenda, without pressure, and without judgment. When you listen this way, something subtle but powerful occurs. The other person no longer has to defend their experience. They no longer have to exaggerate, justify, or protect what they feel. Their inner world becomes less rigid because it is no longer under threat. Understanding loosens what force never could. And being a better listener does not mean you always say the right thing. It means you are willing to stay present when things feel unclear, uncomfortable, or emotionally charged. It means choosing curiosity over certainty, understanding over correction, presence over performance. Carl Rogers believed that every person has an innate tendency toward growth, but this tendency only emerges when the environment feels safe enough. Listening is how safety is communicated, not through reassurance, not through advice, but through accurate, compassionate understanding. This is why deep listening creates such strong bonds. It tells the other person, you do not have to become someone else in order to be accepted here. Few experiences are more regulating or more healing than that. As you practice this kind of listening, you may notice changes not only in others, but in yourself. Conversations feel less exhausting. You feel less pressure to manage outcomes. You become more comfortable with silence, more tolerant of emotional complexity, more grounded in the present moment. You may also notice that conflict begins to shift, not because disagreement disappears, but because it becomes safer. When people feel understood, they are more willing to understand in return. Listening becomes reciprocal rather than defensive. This approach does not require perfection. You will misunderstand, you will interrupt, you will feel impatient at times. Carl Rogers never expected flawless listening. He believed in genuine effort and continual refinement. Each moment of sincere presence strengthens your capacity to listen the next time. Deep listening is not about being passive or agreeable. It is about being open. It does not remove your voice. It clarifies when and how to use it. When understanding is established, communication becomes more effective, not less. Over time, this practice reshapes relationships. People feel safer being honest with you. Conversations deepen naturally. Trust grows quietly, not because you demand it, but because you create the conditions where it can exist. Carl Rogers showed us that listening is not merely a skill, it is a stance toward humanity, a way of recognizing the dignity of another person's inner life. In a world that often rushes to label, fix, or dismiss, deep listening becomes an act of respect. If there is one thing to remember, it is this: being a better listener is not about changing others. It is about allowing them to change themselves. When people feel truly heard, they do not need to be pushed forward. They find their own direction. And in offering that space to others, you may discover something unexpected, a deeper sense of connection, a quieter confidence, and a more humane way of being with the people in your life.